It was August when Canberras of number 139 Squadron left England to fly some 5,000 miles via Iceland and Canada to Jamaica. Whoever had the idea up at the Air Ministry of sending us to the Caribbean on a training flight had the right idea, for Jamaica was celebrating her tercentenary, and our own squadron has a particular place in the heart of the Jamaican himself. In 1940, they collected a lot of money to buy bombers for the Royal Air Force, £190,000 to be exact. Everybody gave, so it was no surprise to see the flags of welcome to number 139, the Jamaica Squadron. The governor greeted the force commander, Air Marshal Whitley, who'd piloted the lead in Canberra, and the formalities over, the islanders themselves came to say hello. They were delighted with the way their money had been spent. Mind you, Canberras weren't invented in 1940. We flew Blenheims, but they were thrilled to be near enough to touch their successors. With us too on this trip were Hastings of number 511 Squadron, Transport Command. By the way, if you want to know who's talking to you, well, my name won't mean anything. I was one of the pilots, and they told me to volunteer and tell you all about it. Anyway, the following day, we showed them what the Canberras could do by giving them one of the noisiest half hours in their lives, our first air display. Next day was to be a spick and span day. The freedom of the capital, Kingston, was conferred on the squadron, and that meant one big turnout. We had the band of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, and those people who couldn't get along to watch probably heard the bands echoing right round the island. Yes, we had two of them. Just in front of us, the Jamaican police band was playing for all it was worth, as the squadron commander led us past the saluting base. He accepted the keys of the city on our behalf, and then the Air Marshal laid a wreath in the King George Memorial Park. I've seen many such ceremonies, and how very moving it always is, whether it's November at the Cenotaph or summer here in Jamaica. Our 5-day visit was over, and we flew right across the Caribbean to British Guiana, some 1,500 miles. We were flying around Tempest time, and we'd heard about Hurricanes Connie and Diane and the damage they'd done, ripping through forests like a giant electric shaver, and so we flew high to avoid being shaken around like beads in a rattle. Well, in a way, that to me sums up British Guiana. They've the most tremendous forests inland from their capital, Georgetown. From here, many of the houses and buildings look made of concrete, but they're wood. There are fewer now than there used to be, but they've had some pretty nasty fires. Fortunately, the very fine Anglican cathedral was spared. Yes, it's wood too. The guidebook says it's the tallest wooden building in the world. Georgetown seems a quiet sort of a place, but it wasn't always so. About 150 years ago, this country, the size of Britain, changed hands 6 times in some 30 years, with ourselves, the French, and the Dutch having a go before it became British Guiana. I don't know how they greeted them in 1814, but we were more than welcome. The thing I remember most, though, was the flight in an amphibian called the Grum and Goose that some of us were taken on. And it was very nice to be passengers for a change, stooging along at a little over 100. That 300-foot suspension bridge over the Potaro River was built in the 30s. What they did before that, I can't imagine, for it's the only one there is. These are the forests I was telling you about. And then I saw something I shall never forget. That. Those falls are higher than Niagara and Victoria put together. I thought we'd just be taking a look from the air. But blow me if the pilot didn't bring the goose right down on top, tethered us to a tree trunk so that we could get out and have a gander. Of course, I assumed we were the first to land here. But we weren't pioneers, they often do it. So being a mere tripper, I got all the gen I could. The Kaieteur, or Old Man Falls, are named after an old Indian who took himself over the top in a canoe to pacify his gods. Oh, it was a long time ago, mind you. And that brown split down the middle is his epitaph. And there's another one at the foot of the falls. When there's a drought, you can see his canoe turn to stone. Like all good things, the joyride came to an end, and in the most spectacular way. We took off over the falls. Just imagine it. You're on level water, and then all of a sudden you're 780 feet up in the air. With the end of our visit to British Guiana, we took off for our next port of call, about 350 miles away. We took our time, got there in 45 minutes. Port of Spain is the capital of Trinidad, and through its history of slaves and commerce and wars, has managed to become almost a brand tub of nationalities. But the common language is really music. Music from hammered-out oil drums. They did more than get a bob back on the empties. They made a whole new sound which symbolizes the ingenuity and spirit of the Trinidadians. The atmosphere of the place forces one to relax, and so we did, with a fine old pirate ship grinning away at us from across the bay. That's me going into a spin. I think we could have stayed in the water for days on end, but we were expected elsewhere, 200 miles away, in Barbados. There go the local nippers, swimming like jet-propelled fish, trying to catch a tow. All the boats were making for the harbor, not to shelter from a hurricane, just to be there in good time for the air display. It's true, anyone would have been hard put to it to find a square inch of space on that grandstand of a harbor wall. It seemed as if the whole town had shut up shop for the day, nice and early, to get down there. And how the excitement grew as the wind carried the news that we were coming. While we rolled and dived and people craned their necks, the rest of the island stood still. Barbados has so much that is very English. You'll see a signpost to Henley, another to Highgate, Bushy Park. You'll even find a Trafalgar Square, for Nelson was based in the Caribbean for 3 years. And you have a sort of feeling the place looks much the same as it did when he used to drop in for his barrels of rum. For sugar is something Barbados has plenty of, and it's carried across the seas in modern ships. For local trading, it's high masts and sails and coasting schooners in this world of adventure tales and poems learnt in childhood days. Stately Spanish galleon coming from the isthmus, dipping through the tropics by the palm green shores. And this palm green shore is Emerald Beach in the Bahamas, 1,400 miles from Barbados. And this was our last but one stop. If you ever wondered what the Garden of Eden looked like, take yourself off to the Caribbean and have a good look, for it must have been just exactly like this. Well, that's how I see it anyway. But I don't imagine our sort of games would have appealed to Adam and Eve. At the back of our minds, we knew time was running out. Soon we would be off to Bermuda and the start of our journey home. It was a perfect evening, rounded off with the sort of sunset I've only ever seen in one of those travelogue films. And so we stayed and watched, and no one said a word. We were a day late arriving at Bermuda, having been held up by a hurricane called Edith. Although the Met boys reported she'd been blowing for moments at 100 miles an hour, very little damage had been done to the island. And when the force commander was so warmly welcomed by the acting governor, Edith was no longer the main topic of conversation. We were, and our planes, and our final flying display of the tour. Very shortly, number 139 Squadron would be headed home. And those of us lucky enough to have come to the Caribbean will never forget the kindness and hospitality. I know my list for Christmas cards is now a lot longer. And it was just after Christmas that another Canberra squadron was off to the tropics, this time to West Africa. I didn't go myself, but a chum of mine did. He'll tell you all about it.
Thank you, Peter. I must say I was looking forward to seeing the sun. We'd all forgotten what it was to be warm back in England. Our force consisted of 6 Canberras from No. 9 Squadron Bomber Command, supported by Hastings of No. 24 Commonwealth Squadron Transport Command, carrying ground crews and spares. We would be away for 5 weeks, visiting Nigeria, the Gold Coast, Sierra Leone and the Gambia. There were 2 reasons for the trip. First, to be present in Nigeria during the tour by Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. Secondly, there were special tests to be made, but it was the first visit of jets to tropical West Africa. Again, the force commander was Air Marshal Whitley, and Air Marshal Sir Harry Broadhurst, Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command, was coming as far as Lagos to welcome Her Majesty, who was arriving the day after us. We'd expected to leave minus temperatures well behind us as we took off, heading for the tropical sun. But some of us were in for a surprise. Flying over Africa at about 50,000, it was minus 69 below freezing. But when next day Her Majesty was due to arrive, there was no surprise at the warmth of affection and excitement which literally encircled Lagos airfield on that colourful day. A ceremonial boater may seem strange to us, but the Minister of Labour wanted to wear his best hat for his Queen. Waiting to greet the Queen and the Duke when they stepped out of their Argonaut at the beginning of the Royal Tour was the Governor-General, Sir James Robertson, the Naval and Army Chiefs of Staff, and Sir Harry Broadhurst for the Royal Air Force. One tends to think of these formal greetings as, well, impersonal. But if you've ever been close to the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, you'd know how friendly such moments can become. Sometimes a march past can be a rather remote part of royal occasions. But with the Royal West Africa Frontier Force, it was far from that. Before the tour was 10 minutes old, everyone knew that it was going to be happy and picturesque. You think they cheer loudly in Lambeth? You want to hear them in Lagos. This day belonged to the people of Lagos. Our turn came another day. The Queen and the Duke were going to inspect the squadron, so you can imagine how the morning was spent. It may not be the best haircut he's had. I wouldn't mind betting it was the quickest and the cheapest. When inspections are due, there's always a bit of a flap. But no one would have guessed it once the moment we'd been working up to arrived. This honour bestowed on the squadron by the Queen was a wonderful beginning to our African journey. Apart from this inspection, there'd been an informal dinner with our own force commander sitting next to the Queen, and she'd shown the greatest interest in our squadron and its history. The fact that at the beginning of the war, when we flew Wellingtons, No. 9 Squadron took part in the first RAF bombing raid of the war, and later played a prominent part in the night raids on Germany, and how together with No. 617 Squadron, the Dambusters, it helped sink the German battleship Tirpitz. These and other events go to make our squadron's own story. And here we were in Nigeria writing another piece of it, proud to be playing our part in this memorable royal tour. And now they were off to Kaduna. The Viking would do it in about 2 hours 20. We were due to salute the Queen on her arrival, so we left 90 minutes after the Viking, which gives you some idea of our speed. The following day we left for Accra on the Gold Coast. Here we would be on our own. No royal tour, just us and our cameras. We felt the flag over the governor's residence was flying for us. The sight of our Canberra certainly caused something of a stir, especially at the airfield. And the welcome given to our force commander and to all of us by the officials of the Gold Coast government, led by the Prime Minister, Dr. Nkrumah, was as open and as genuine as their smiling faces. Everyone, of course, wanted to come over for a closer look. Husbands may have been a little quicker off the mark, But that only proves that ladies all over the world are the same when it comes to looking at complicated machinery. The VIPs were given a trip in the Canberra. One of us flew, Dr. Nkrumah, and the governor was taken up by the Air Marshal himself. The air display we gave them on the Saturday morning was a big success. And that mile of curved beach and cliffs between the Christianborg Castle and the harbour lighthouse, what an ideal setting it made. You know, we had about 50,000 people there, and as everywhere, they liked our low-level flight. But I think it was the steep climbs and the roads everyone enjoyed the most. They really brought the house down. When our 3-day visit to Accra was over, we resumed our royal tour duties, giving flypasts wherever we were commanded. For 12 days, we were stationed near the 1,000-year-old walled city of Kano in Nigeria. And what an incredible place that is. It's ruled by an emir, and I'd heard so much about him that I thought that white building down there must be his palace. It turned out to be a brand new mosque. Kano has its own airport and its own way of talking you down, for no one, not even the Queen, can land until the emir's trumpeter has blown the okay. The emir is a splendid figure. The day he came to see us, his whole court came too, in 20 large cars. It was a return visit. For the day before, the Air Marshal, his deputy, and the squadron commander had been received by the emir in his palace. Do you know what intrigued our visitors most? The fact that a plane can fly without a propeller. The things we take for granted were remarkable to the people we visited. We were always finding that. And of course it worked both ways. And you know, we didn't need any tourist attractions. Just to be treated as welcome visitors was enough. To me, their houses made of mud, as they were 1,000 years ago, their costume, the market, was a whole new world. There was that peaceful ancient town outside Kano itself, called Dambata, where we were received by the chief. While we were there, Mr. Morley, the district officer, looked after us. 50 years ago, he told me, Dambata was a little different. If anyone went too far outside his home, he was quite likely to find himself dodging a spear thrown from the next door village. It really was difficult to believe as we strolled in the evening air, and it says a lot for the tireless work of the district officers. There was tireless work of a different kind back at Kano Airport. The local people had asked if they could polish the planes. To show we appreciated their friendliness and hospitality, we gave them the sight and the sound of the Canberra in action. And in that African dusk, 100,000 people stood and cheered as we tore across their sky. We'd waited for sundown because it was cooler, and we wanted to avoid colliding with the vultures and hawks, which by that hour should have been in bed. But 3 of us smacked right into them. We got off much lighter than they did. I've heard jets called by other names, especially by the people back home who live around the airdrome. But it was at Freetown in Sierra Leone that I came across a new name for them. It seemed that the typical jet noise reminded the local people of a whistling kettle. And as their one word for everything that flies is chicken, the Canberras became known as steam chickens. That's certainly one memory I took back with me. The other was when we were refueling to leave for Bathurst. It wasn't how it was done, although that was pretty primitive, doing it from those drums. No, it was the fact that while we were topping up, the band came to play for us. That reminds me, I must have a word with the Royal Air Force Director of Music and see if he can't lay on this music while you work at our station. After Freetown, we had one more territory to visit before turning for home. We were off to Bathurst in the Gambia for the last of our displays. You always get a big crowd at a display, but that apart, wherever a plane is in the sky, eyes search it out. which is strange, really, considering people have been flying for over 50 years. At Bathurst that day, I know the governor was watching us with a look not far short of envy. He'd asked for a flight and got it. He'd also asked to be given the works, and who were we to argue with the governor? The Air Marshal said goodbye for us. So ended our final display and our journey to the tropics. Though in the Gambia, I remember, it was more like an English summer's day at its best. It was a little difficult to believe it wouldn't be exactly the same when we arrived back home. I should have known better. It was still winter, and while we'd had to cover the cockpits to keep off the sun, our families had been legging the pipes to keep out the frost. We'd spent 5 weeks in Africa, and I'm not pretending that I know it now. But once you've been there and liked it, it'll grip you more strongly than you realize and be forever pulling you back. 3¼ hours ago, I'd waved goodbye to Africa, and back in England, only a part of me had arrived. But eventually, I caught up with myself and happily swapped my tropical tan for a pink nose and a bunch of blue fingers. And that went for all of us, for we were glad to be home and with our families.